This is St. Maria's Meals, a project of Catholic Charities in the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. Every week, St. Maria's Meals feeds an average of 300 people on the street. Most of them are homeless. Immediately after addressing a joint session of Congress next Thursday, Pope Francis will come here to meet with Catholic Charities clients and see St. Maria's Meals in action.
This is who he is. He's a man of the poor. He's going to go to the most powerful place maybe in our country, Congress, and he's going to leave there. And before he leaves this city, he's going to say, let me go back with my people.
In all his foreign trips, in addition to meeting with state dignitaries and religious leaders, Francis has made it a point to schedule significant time to visit poor and marginalized people. Here in the U.S., he'll also be visiting immigrant families and prisoners.
Why does he do that? It's what we find in the scriptures consistently. In the Old Testament is always God sending the prophets and speaking a voice for the orphans, the widows, those who are poor, those who are disenfranchised. In the New Testament, we find that Jesus not only does that, but he says, as long as you do it for one of the least of my brothers or sisters, you have done it for me.
John Carr is director of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life at Georgetown University. He says Francis is simply living out his faith.
In some ways, the most powerful things about his message is not what he says, but what he does and who he meets with. He is a walking, talking parable.
Francis's actions and several of his recent high-profile statements on controversial issues have led some observers to characterize him as political and radical. But many U.S. Catholic leaders argue that it would be a mistake to view Francis solely through a political lens. They say Francis is embodying foundational Roman Catholic beliefs that come from the scriptures and from the Church's social teaching. Father John Ensler, director of Catholic Charities in D.C., says the Pope's emphasis on poor people, immigrants, and refugees flows directly from the major principles outlined in Catholic teaching about achieving social justice.
You give a preferential option to the poor. They have a preference. Now, I will tell you, I don't think I live that so well. The Pope seems to say, let's work on that. Get out in the streets. Let's work on that. Make a difference.
Catholic social thought begins with the life and dignity of the human person.
Carr says that concern for people was evident in Francis's recent encyclical on the environment.
We treat people as things. We treat creation as something we can exploit. And he comes with a different message, that every person is precious and that the environment, climate, the earth is a gift, not something to exploit.
Catholic analysts affirm the beliefs that undergird Francis's actions are no different than those of his predecessors.
He's getting the message of the Catholic Church back to its most basic roots.
But what is different is the perspective he brings from his own background and experience.
His ministry was not in Poland, a communist country like John Paul II. He did not do his work at the university or in the Vatican like Pope Benedict. He was a pastor in a third world country. He's the grandson of immigrants. So he brings a different view. While the message is the same, the urgency, the priority is different.
Some Catholics, including some high-ranking Catholics, disagree with how Francis has been applying church teachings. Several U.S. conservatives have raised concerns about the Pope's recent economic statements, especially his criticism of unfettered capitalism. When asked about the controversy, Francis said he wanted to read up on it more before his U.S. trip. New Orleans Archbishop Gregory Aymond says Francis's economic views are based on the church teaching that every person deserves opportunities for a good quality of life.
There is an unfair distribution in the world of the riches and the goods of the world, and he's calling us to task and saying, how do we distribute this differently? And that's a valid question, certainly for us in the United States and in many, many other countries, that it's a very small number of people who own everything and control everything, and very often the poor are not really considered.
Aymond doesn't see Francis backing away from that.
The message is not popular, but it's a message that comes from the scriptures. It's a message he believes in, and I don't think that there's any possibility that he's going to let go of that.
Many American Catholics will also be watching to see how Francis addresses controversial social issues like gay marriage and abortion. Some conservatives are disappointed that he hasn't been more outspoken about them. Carr says, once again, Francis has a different approach.
The best way to describe Pope Francis' efforts around human life, around the family, is no obsession. It's not the only thing he cares about, but no retreat. He says he's a child of the church.
He's a welcoming spirit and says that we as church need to open our hearts and our lives to all people. Sometimes people misunderstand that and say, well, that means we have to compromise who we are or what we believe in. And we don't. We are Catholics and we believe in the scriptures, we believe in the Catholic teaching.
According to McGuire of the Catholic Association, the life issues are part of Francis's comprehensive view of human dignity.
In the same breath, same sentence, almost every single time he brings up the issue, he talks about the unborn, the elderly, the poor, and the disabled. And so he's talking about the margins of society and that these are all people who are marginalized in different ways.
Carr says, like Catholic social teaching itself, Francis doesn't fall into neat political categories.
He will make everyone uncomfortable if you listen carefully. I can't wait to see him in front of the Congress. I think there will be moments when everyone feels affirmed and everyone feels challenged. So for him, this is not an ideology. This is the gospel at work.
McGuire says younger Catholics especially resonate with Francis's call to meet people where they are.
People grew up in broken homes. Probably all of us know somebody who's had an abortion. We all have gay friends. And so I think his message is to literally walk alongside those people. And I think that's something that millennials get. Because we know that often the best way to bring the joy of the gospel, the message of Christianity to people, is to be their friend.
Eamon says on issues from the environment to poverty, Francis is challenging all Catholics, including him, to be more intentional about living out their beliefs.
When I saw all that he was doing, I must admit that I had to look into my own conscience and say, am I spending enough time with the poor, the prisoners, the street people? Do they have a priority in my ministry? His example speaks loudly.
And given the excitement surrounding his visit, that example will be front and center well beyond the coming week. I'm Kim Lawton reporting.